This is a LabVIEW Beginner lesson where we make a heart rate monitor. This is the first of lesson 5. In lesson 5, we'll focus on finishing up the application, improving the user experience, and then creating it into an application and then an installer, which you can install on the PC without LabVIEW. Lesson 5-1, we're improving the user experience. We'll be improving the look of the GUI, adding helpful tip strips, which shows up when you hover over a button in LabVIEW, which can help the user know what the button actually does. You can't just convey everything with the button label. And then at the end, we'll make a hardware selector pop up so that when you run it, you can select which hardware you have connected, or if you don't have any connected, you can choose the simulator. We can start by opening up the GUI. The first thing we can do is to kind of utilize the space a bit more. We can start off by replacing these graphs. You could delete them and add a new one, but the quickest one is to replace them, because then you mostly keep all the settings. So I like the NXT styles, and we want the graph. And we can do the same with this one. Now, I don't need to see these two at the same time, so I'm gonna make a tab, which I'll put them in. We want to use a tab control because then we can get more in the same amount of space. Sometimes people use tabs for everything, and it can go a little bit overboard, but we'll try to be restrictive. We'll just start by placing both of these in here. I like to keep them the same place. What I usually do is just push them one up and to the side where I see they're moving. So you see it gets bigger that direction when I push it. That means that's enough. And you see me pushing this, which means it's perfectly centered. Now with this one, I'll do the same. And now you can see they're the same place. We will also make these graphs a bit bigger. Let's just do it in here, because here you can actually set the size rather than pulling them. 500 by 600, that's a nice size. Let's do the same with this one. We use a little bit more space now, but what you can see is that with the same amount of space plus a little bit more, we get a much larger graph, which is nice, because sometimes it's limited how much real estate you have on the screen. Now we can move the buttons. We can make all of them the same size. I think this size is nice. So we'll just 36 by 96. We'll just mark all of the buttons, property, and let's write 36 by 96. That's how you make a lot of buttons the same size. We can also align them by pressing this. We'll align them to the left. Remember that the text counts. And then same with this one, it just smashes them up against each other. You have a lot of different things you can do here. These ones align them to like a line here, center, etc. This one puts them at a certain distance. You can either have a set distance or just put them together vertical or horizontally. And this guy groups them together so they can't be moved apart later. And then we have these two controls. This one is a bit big, so I'll just put it in the middle. And then lastly, we have this control. So I like to have my controls at one place and then have my indicators another place. Since we have so much space now, we can also increase the size. If you want the whole thing to be increased, the name and everything, you mark everything. But if you just want the content in here, you just select the numbers and the size you want. Here we go. And we still want the feedback. You can have it there. Make it a little bit more shallow maybe. And then put the error here. You can probably do this a little bit more. Now, so the error in isn't all that important, so I usually just move it out of the screen. Now you have your graphs. There are ways to make it more complicated. I won't go through, but you can have these horizontal and vertical bars, which you can kind of set as limits for certain things, and you can say that the button should follow the left one, and then the graph should be as big as it can within those, so the screen adapts to your screen. Because right now, it doesn't matter if we have it small or big, it's the same. So what we'll do is we'll align it. I think I'll push this one a little bit down here. We don't really need the names anymore, so we can also move these. Label, remove label, remove label, because the name is already there. Could also argue that this is not necessary too, since we basically only get one signal per. We could also push them in the same graph. So if you wanted to, we could also visible plot legend and remove it and then get even more space. But I won't, because maybe we want to add something later. Now we want to add some tip strips. What you do is you go into properties here and documentation. This is just, well, anything, while this one will show up when you hover over the button. Let me give you an example. This button stops the whole application. Now, when we hover over this, we'll get this message. This button allows the user to pause the acquisition. Well, you don't have to say user here, you can just say you, or depends on the type of language you want to use, and then, oh, you don't even have to address the user, you could just write this button maybe, button clears the way for. Okay. Then this one. So this one is a bit more complicated. So if you remember from previous lessons, we added this one because sometimes a filter adds an artifact to the signal and we want to remove this. So we could have a longer explanation here and then a short one here, but I think I can manage everything within 255 characters. So yeah, I can just write what I said. Sometimes the filter leaves unwanted artifacts in signal. This control allows us to remove them. The sample size in seconds. So here we should go into the type def to kind of explain each button, but we can have one for the whole thing and then one for each button. So let's start with the whole thing. Allows the user to choose between automatic detection of the pulse frequency or doing it manually. Okay, that's that. And then for each here, we can have this button, manual or automatic pulse frequency detection. Oops, pressed the wrong button there. This one sets the minimum top level of the signal. Should maybe explain this more because this could be confusing. Should be the lowest point the signal always passes on its way to a peak. Then we can just copy this. Set the maximum the signal should be the highest point. Highest passes to the bottom. You might be able to explain it better, so you don't have to copy exactly what I say, but at least now we have a GUI. Let's run it and then see how it looks. Now we have our things, and we hover over here, and we see all the information. This can help you convey more complicated things to your users. Well, that's it, I guess. So we could add something more here or here, but we won't. I think this is self-explanatory, and status feedback, well, I think I will just say status feedback with more words. I can't really explain it any better. So that's it for that one. Let's now move to the selecting of hardware. Selecting which hardware you have at launch. The next step would be to add the hardware selector. So this is part of the init, so we can just let's just copy this one because it's got all the stuff. So open additional copy, and we'll put it in init, and then we have init select hardware. Now we can delete all the contents here because we're not going to do that again. Just use this function to get everything close by again. We don't need this one. We can have an error if we want, but we can mostly use that one just to ignore the questions if there is an error. So what we do want is to make a pop-up. We want this whole screen to be a pop-up. If there's no error, we would like you to be able to select between hardware or just cancel. So you can start by just dragging this one in, because that's what you want to select. You want to select the type of hardware you want. But we should also have a OK and cancel. I'm going to silver just to show you a few other buttons. I guess the best thing is to be consistent, but that's fine. So let's take the OK button. And then let's find the cancel button. There's no difference between the buttons I choose. It's just the visual. But when they already made the visual part, why do anything about it? It's nice that some work has been done for you. We don't need their labels as they are obvious. And then we can make the GUI a little bit smaller. We want to pass this data out, so what we can do is to create another one, change it to indicator, and say this is the output. So we want this one to pop up, and then it sends out the output. We don't want to see the output, so we can just hide it. For this guy to pop up, we need to go into the properties, go into Windows Appearance, and then you could just choose top level, which it's nice to choose anyway, but then don't show front panel when loaded, because this is just annoying. There you go. So when we make the backend, there's multiple ways to do it. One could just have a while loop that just checks when you press it, but I always prefer using a user event. And this is because it uses less power, because it just waits. It just waits for you to make the choice. It doesn't need to have a wait, so you have to unnecessarily wait when you want it to proceed. And it doesn't use unnecessarily CPU, because it needs to check all the time if something has happened. So what can the user do? It can either cancel, press the X button here, cancel, or press OK. So we'll start with the easy ones, which is just if they want to just close it, it would mean the same as canceling it. So we'll make a case for that. I want to have a selection if it's cancelled, then it's false, and then it just chooses simulated mode. I also want this to be create unwired, so we don't have to make it for every case. Next case is the cancel button. So if they press the cancel button, we also have a sending out a false signal. I could have just had each of them have their own pipe in here, but I think it's easier to just, like, they could have each their own version of the hardware, like it's simulated in here, puts output, etc. But in my opinion, this is better, because now in the error too, I can add one, which is false. So that when the data comes out here, this is simulated. If for any reason, it's always simulated. And if I wanted another default, then I could change that, because you could though say, oh, I always have my DAC here. So then you could have DAC as the default if you cancel or anything. I'll change this to out to make it more apparent what it does. And then lastly, we want our button here, the OK button. If it's an OK button, then it sends the true signal. I could map these to the actual buttons, etc., but I don't see any point in that. Might save me 1 second, but I have a second to spare. Now, as probably a lot of you are screaming at the screen saying I have these wrongs, you will be correct. Luckily I catched it here, so make this one true. So when it's true, it reads whatever you have selected here, even if that's simulator. But if you cancel, you cancel with the button, with the panel close, or it just errors, it's false and it goes to simulated mode. Now we need to place, or first we should change the icon. guess it's here. No. Yeah. So here you go. Heart rate monitor. And then we can actually use this one instead. Select hardware. Now you just put this here. And replace this with this one. Let's try to start this application now. Into the launcher. So which do you want? We want the simulator. Okay. And here we get it. I don't have my MyDAC connected, so we can try with the MyDAC, and then we get an error. So it works as intended. We still haven't added anything else to the other ones, but that's fine. Now I've connected my MyDAC, so let's see how this works. We still have the error from last time. We see something is happening. Still moving my finger a lot. I don't have a proper light. Let's clear the waveform so we can start on this one. You see the start problem here. So we'll just move the signal a little bit. I'll try to stay calm. And then maybe increase the light a little bit. As I hope everyone remembers, this is quite sensitive thing. We try to keep the hardware as simple as possible, which of course makes it more complex or sensitive, you could say, less idiot proof. Like your smartwatch is pretty idiot proof, but that's a lot more hardware and a completely different way of measuring your pulse. Still see there's a problem here, but the problem is really my light source. Now I'm getting a more consistent result, even but I still get a little bit up and down because the measurement we take is very sensitive to any interference, moving your fingers, moving the light, having weak light, etc. Since I add a really strong light, I change to my little finger, so because it's the thinnest finger, and yeah, now I'm getting the correct results. So if you have any struggles with this, it's very understandable because of the little hardware we use. I just, yeah, basically talking interferes. I get a lot better result when I'm not talking. So yeah, this is because we're using simple hardware. It's just a light sensitive resistor. So any change will really change a lot, or the changes we're looking for by the dilation of the blood vessel is minute compared to any movement you would do or change in light source. So place your hand very steadily, have a strong light, and you will get better results. The hardware, the simplicity of the hardware was chosen because it's easy to get. The goal of these lessons is to learn to make a proper application and to not focus on the hardware, so the simple hardware was selected. And we can see also that this one takes a little bit too much space at some point. So let's make this one bigger. Let's stop it. Let's make this one a little bit bigger. And this one should really be cleared on startup. So the thing is, if we got more feedback here, this would be cleared, but it's the remnant of the last one where this control indicator hasn't really been handled in any way. So it remains. But let's avoid that. Create a local variable Then just here in the beginning, we'll just put in empty data in. Then we'll create a constant. But as you see, the constant copies all the data in the control, which can be useful if you're trying to copy some data of some sort. But let's now delete it before we do this, because that's not what we want. There you have it. We have this bigger and this is cleared. Now let's try it one last time. And yeah, let's choose the MyDAC. So that's it for this lesson. It works a bit janky because of the light condition and talking at the same time. You need to be very still when taking the measurement. In the next lesson, we'll focus on making this into an application which both an exe file, so you don't need a project, but also an installer, so you don't need to actually have LabVIEW on the computer you're running this.